Thank you, Hannah, very much indeed. And I'm going to go completely off script to start with and say, as an Islington girl, how wonderful it is to be back in the Union Chapel. As many of you here as when I came to see Billy Bragg. You're very brave to come out on a rainy Monday night. We're very pleased that you haven't lost the habit of coming to live events. We very much look forward to hearing from our speakers in just a moment and your participation. And of course, we started with a really small topic. Can we fix capitalism? No point in messing about. We went for the big topic with intelligence squared tonight. And I thought it was an interesting moment to step back, of course, from all the internal political party fighting, and to invite two people with very wide-ranging views and very wide-ranging experience of the topic. But before they get their say, in a democratic manner, we thought that you should have your say first, or at least your show of hands a way of communicating with us. So we're going to ask first, who thinks capitalism, albeit with tweaks and reforms, is still the best economic system we've got? So if you think that, give us a wave. This is fabulously... Oh, she's off. Gillian is just...
I think that's my job in this whole event.
Leave your hand up just a minute. Can I have a look? Is everyone unscientifically taking stock? I like the way that Gillian voted for herself there. It's a good moment. And who thinks we need a completely new economic system? Yeah, right. Thank God, because otherwise it was the wrong booking. Well, that was fairly clearly capitalism can be fixed in our audience tonight. But I would say from Intelligence Squared debates, I've done a few recently, obviously far less interesting in the sense of being online only. There was quite a lot of shifting around once people had heard the speakers. So that is really where we're going to go next. I would perhaps give them this challenge from the Marxist literary critic Frederick Jameson, who once said, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." I wonder whether that is still the case. I'm going to turn first. I think Yanis is going to lead us off tonight, if I read my annals true. Yanis Varoufakis will be known to many of you from our screens and his fiery contributions to this debate. He was Greek finance minister from January to July 2015, a short period, but one in which he managed to be in the headlines most days. He resigned, refusing to sign a loan agreement on the grounds it would worsen Greece's economic circumstances, which brought him into some conflict with Angela Merkel, who's just leaving the international stage as German Chancellor at the moment. Nowadays, he is chair of political economy at the University of Athens, as well as visiting professor of political economy at King's College London, a best-selling author of many books, including Another Now, Dispatches from an Alternative Present, bit of a clue there, I think, and a wonderful one, actually, which I remember talking to him about a few years ago, called Talking to My Daughter About the Economy, a brief history of capitalism. I once interviewed Yanis and said, "You're a bit of a champagne socialist, aren't you?" And he said, no, not really, so I don't like champagne, but I like very good white wine. I hope that's still the case. Yanis Varoufakis, the floor is yours. 5 minutes on can we fix capitalism?
Thank you, Anne. It is wonderful to be back, not only at the Union Chapel, but also with people in the same space. Okay, now the problem with these boys' games, Oxford Union debates, is that they force upon us a dichotomy. Either you're in favor of emotion or against emotion, which is fun, but not very helpful. So allow me to answer the question in my own way. I don't think it's an interesting question, whether we should fix capitalism. Because capitalism, and this is something that I have managed to convince myself of in the last year or so, and will be the subject of my next book, I think that 2021 is a little bit like the 1790s, when Adam Smith was writing The Wealth of Nations, in the sense that the world was feudal, but there were small pockets of capitalism that were emerging, that Adam Smith managed to cotton onto, Glasgow University. It was happening just below him, in the Clyde Valley. He could see it. But it was tiny. It was a speck of capitalist dust in a desert of feudalism. Still, Adam Smith managed to see that what was growing under his window in the Clyde and in Manchester and elsewhere was infecting feudalism, and feudalism was not going to be on the way out. Even when Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto, of whose the first 5-6 pages are a paean to capitalism, really all about breaking down superstition and ushering in new technologies and so on. It was a kind of prequel to globalization, which was not actually taking place. He was ahead of his time. I think we are in a similar moment. I think that capitalism is on its way out, not because the left, our pathetic lot, have managed to overthrow. No, we have not done that. If anything, we have solidified capitalism. I'm talking about the left, through our orchestrated idiocy across many countries and continents. No, but capitalism is overthrowing itself in the same way that feudalism overthrew itself. And here is some food for thought and for criticism by Gillian. Look, before we can have any meaningful discussion about capitalism, we have to define our terms. What is capitalism? Capitalism has transformed itself so magnificently over the centuries. The capitalism of Adam Smith doesn't exist. It's not the baker, the brewer, and the butcher. Since the Second Industrial Revolution, it was, the Henry Fords, the Edisons, the large monopoly or oligopoly capital. Then we had big government with the New Deal and the Great Society. Then after that, we had financialized capitalism, or rentier capitalism. It really has this capacity to transform itself. But throughout all these transformations, capitalism retained two main characteristics. First, the fuel that drives it is profit, profitability. Profit, which then gets reinvested, becomes new capital, and the thing goes on. The second characteristic of capitalism is markets. The creation of the labor market, following the enclosures, the eviction of the peasants from the lands created a mass of workers who then became the proletariat, the commodification of the land. Every process, production process, extraction process, is happening through markets. So, profits and markets, central pillars of capitalism. Looking around, I already see it's at a very early stage. Wherever we look at, we see capitalist relations. There's no doubt about that. In the same way that wherever Adam Smith looked around him, around the world, it was mostly feudal relations. But I think that I can already see the end of capitalism because, on the one hand, profits have ceased to be the fuel of the economic system we have. It is central bank money now. Without central bank money, the whole thing collapses, even the sectors that, big tech and so on, that are highly profitable. They are squeezing out all the other sectors and participating in ending the markets and replacing them with platforms. Amazon, Facebook, and so on, they are not alternative markets. They are new technological fiefdoms. You enter Amazon, you exit the marketplace, you exit capitalism, you enter a realm where everything that is being bought and sold is controlled by one algorithm, one person, one owner. This is like a fiefdom, only it's a techno fiefdom. So for me, the question is not, can we fix capitalism? The question is it true, is my hunch right, that we are already moving into a post-capitalist system, which I call techno-feudalism, for want of a better term, and given that this techno-feudalism is highly at odds with liberalism, with Adam Smith, not just with socialists, what do we do? How do we plan our collective strategy for not becoming techno-peasants? within this global techno-feudalism.
You left us there hanging on a note where many of us have probably spent the day feeling like techno-peasants one way or the other as we struggled with the bits of technology which they told us long ago would make our lives easier, and it seemed to take up about 3 hours of the day. So that's a really interesting challenge, and particularly I'm going to hang on to that final point. We're going to hear a bit of to and fro and conversation between our panelists in just a moment, which I'll moderate. But we must hear from Gillian Tett for the other side of the coin on fixing capitalism. And no one better to discourse on that. Gillian is chairman of the US editorial board and US editor at large at the Financial Times. She has covered capitalism, I think. In how many countries would you say over your career, Gillian?
Quite a lot.
Quite a lot, she said, mystifyingly. But certainly not only American capitalism, but the UK, Asia. You were based in Japan for a while. So you have a truly global prism on this. She's also co-founder of the very successful Moral Money section of the Financial Times, which is dedicated to environmental, social and governance, i.e. ESG in the new lingo, news that investors and companies are increasingly embracing. Her new book is Anthrovision, How Anthropology Can Explain Business and Life, and she's a former academic anthropologist by background in her first degree. So a very broad view of capitalism, Gillian, what it means, how it works, and I'm suspecting how you think it might be fixed.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Anne, and it's great to be here tonight. I feel at a disadvantage with Yanis as my adversary because not only have I ever tried to run an economy, but sitting here in Islington, he is on his home turf, home pitch, and I'm not. But I'm going to try and defend capitalism, but not the current form of capitalism. Because I'm trained as an anthropologist, and one of the things anthropologists spend a lot of time doing is look at the gap between what people say they do and what they actually do, between rhetoric, between the rituals and symbols they aspire to, and the actual lived reality. And the core of my argument is that the capitalist flag, the flag of Adam Smith that Yanis talked about, has been waved around a lot in recent years by politicians, by business leaders, by financiers, yes, by financial journalists. But what we have today is not what Adam Smith sketched out. To understand that, you have to go back and realize that there are 2 books of Adam Smith, and only one has been focused on in recent years. The Wealth of Nations lays out a theory about why competition is good. I happen to believe, to channel, I hate to say it, Boris Johnson, by quoting Winston Churchill, that actually competition and profit is the worst way to organize an economy except for all the others that have been tried. I say that having lived in the former Soviet Union where I did my research and seen other visions playing out. But when Adam Smith laid out his vision of capitalism, his vision of market forces, he didn't use the word capitalism, his vision of markets, he had 2 books. The Wealth of Nations, about competition and trade, and The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is one of the inspirations for the Moral Money column, which I co-founded at the Financial Times. And that vision essentially argued that there were 4 components you needed to make markets effective. You needed to have free access to markets. People had to be able to take part in them. You need to have free access to prices. People needed to know what the prices were in a transparent way. You needed to have an illusion of ownership between the people who managed ventures and actually owned them, which in Adam Smith's day were mostly family-owned firms, so it wasn't a problem. And you needed to have a shared moral, ethical, and legal base, which basically provided a foundation for people to have shared values and shared trust. Remember, the roots of the word credit come from the Latin to trust. And without that, it's very hard to have a market. Now, if you dial back and think about what was happening 2 decades ago on Wall Street, you can see that all 4 of those components were missing. People did not have equal access to the markets because guess what? It was powerful cartels on Wall Street and the City of London who were running the show. They didn't have access to prices because yes, you can get access to stock market prices, but there's many other prices in finance that are not visible to the wider public. There wasn't effective elision of ownership and management because guess what? The people who were supposedly owning companies, which is all of us via our pension funds, tended to outsource that to asset managers who were largely asleep at the wheel and didn't understand what was happening inside companies or banks. And there hasn't been a shared moral framework, or even one could argue a legal and ethical framework, essentially putting what's been happening in business and finance into the wider social context. Anthropologists are obsessed with context, obsessed with a sense of consequence of what business and finance does. I would argue that many of those shortcomings are found in other areas of modern capitalism, such as the tech sector, which Yanis just spoke about. I'd actually agree with you that there is a fundamental problem of monopoly power, of a lack of transparency, of a lack of access inside the tech sector as well. And so I would agree with you that capitalism actually isn't particularly effective there at the moment because we don't actually have that at the moment. We have a gap between rhetoric and reality. And yet, I personally still think that that vision of competition, that vision of using profits to be reinvested back in growth, that idea that actually innovation occurs when you have some friction, when you have a sense of personal responsibility, that is still a good set of principles to be using, to be driving an economy forward. So, for those reasons, I remain a fan of Adam Smith when you look at both books. And I'll just leave you with 2 last ideas, which again infuses how I see capitalism, how I'd like to see capitalism play out. As an anthropologist, again, I'm fascinated by words and language. I don't know how many of you know here where the word company comes from originally. I talk about it in my book. It originally comes from Latin, from old Italian actually, con panio, meaning with bread. Because companies were originally seen as groups of people who ate together and then did business together. Similarly, I don't know how many of you know where the word finance comes from, but it actually comes from Old French, finir, meaning to finish, which sounds completely bizarre because people think that finance is basically never-ending loops of money going round and round, like sugar in a candy floss maker, building a bigger and bigger puff of speculation that's kind of meaningless. But originally, finance was about paying off blood debts and finishing actual, tangible commercial transactions. It was a means to an end, not an end in itself. So, to go back to Adam Smith, if you put those 2 books together, the vision of capitalism that I uphold is one where companies are recognized to be about humans and groups of people competing together, building things together, and money is a means to an end, the fuel that drives forward the economy and growth. And I personally think that is a vision that we should be upholding and aspiring to today. And I just say, last of all, I realized Yanis and I both got the dark blue shirt memo, so we may end up agreeing more than we disagreeing, sadly.
Effortlessly stylish. I thought I'd just pick up a couple of points there to question both of you. Yanis, I was just trying to put together a list in my head, and it's a pretty obvious one, but it goes something like this: Karl Marx, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, Stalin, boo. Any number of post-war communist leaders and supporters after the Great Rift in Europe, of course, in 1939 to 45. 1968, radicalism, Maoism, and on home turf, Jeremy Corbyn. Sort of in illustrious company. You see that the line of argument there is, and each of them has seen the death throes of capitalism in some form. And yet, here we all are having a discussion about whether we can fix it. What makes you think the this time it's different factor applies to 2021?
You're quite right. Every socialist, and I count myself as one, has always been like a stopped clock that eventually tells the right time. You know, we kept predicting a massive financial collapse ever since I was, 10, and it happened in 2008. So eventually, all our predictions come true. It doesn't mean we were right analytically about it. Look, why do I think that this time it's different? To quote famous economists. First, I'll repeat some of the things I said, but in a different manner, hopefully, helpfully. Take what happened in the summer of 2020 here in London. I think it was the 12th of August, when you had the announcement that your GDP fell by more than 20% for the first time in the history of British capitalism. Remember that? August 2020. The market expectations were for a fall of about 12 to 13%. It was much, much more than that. And yet 16 minutes later, the London Stock Exchange went up. That has never happened before in the history of capitalism. Why did it happen? For a very logical reason. Because market players thought, oh my God, 20 plus, then immediately, nanoseconds later, they thought, okay, if we're panicking, the Bank of England are panicking. So they're going to print loads of money. And they will pump it in our direction, okay, to refloat the disaster. So let's keep buying. Okay, now, this is simply a little tale that I tell in order to capture the manner in which financial markets have completely decoupled from really existing capitalism. And if you think about it, in 2008, we had a 1929, our generation's 1929. The difference with 1929 was that unlike the Hoover administration in the United States in 29 that let the banks fall, the G7, G20, April 2009, Gordon Brown, London, they decided to refloat them. So they went into a spasm of printing mountain ranges of money to refloat the financial markets, which they did very successfully. Proof that if they want to do something, they do. They do it, right? But ever since they did that, and they did it in a staggered way, the European Central Bank really began doing it in 2012 and then went all out in 2015 with Mario Draghi, 1st of March. But the way I see it now, capitalism has completely been hooked on central bank money. And therefore, why is Jeff Bezos $50 billion richer than he was at the beginning of the pandemic? It's not the profits of Amazon, of his businesses. It is the increases in the share market. Because what happens is, QE means that the central bank prints money, they give it, they effectively given a larger overdraft to the Barclays banks, Deutsche Banks of the world. They look at you people, they say, oh, no, we're not going to lend them because they're hopeless. So they pick up the phone, they call Volkswagen, Siemens, Alstom, Google, Apple, and they say, do you want a few billion? Those people don't need money because they already have stashes of money, which itself is a problem because corporations should be borrowing, not saving. But they take the money because it's free. And they take it and they go to the stock exchange and they buy back their own shares. Okay, so now you have a bifurcation of capitalism. You have the companies that maintain profitability because it's not monopoly that they have. For me, Amazon, General Motors had a monopoly or an oligopoly. Amazon is different. It's a platform. It means that you exit capitalism, you exit the market, and you go into a place where everything that's sold or bought are controlled by one company, one algorithm.
Well,
that is very different.
Let's stick, because there's quite a lot in there, Yanis. Let Gillian come
Okay,
back. Let's stick on that QE, quantitative easing, money sloshing about point.
Just one final phrase.
Then I can throw it over to you.
One final phrase.
Competitor.
So, if what I'm saying holds water, then Adam Smith is simply not relevant. He's as relevant as Karl Marx was in the Soviet Union when you were there. In other words, not at all.
So you're saying Adam Smith's not relevant because the financial markets today don't tie into the real economy, and because essentially you have platform monopolies on technology.
Yes, and even the companies that are not platform companies, through private equity takeovers, they're being taken over, loaded with debt, which is financialized. Those companies are then split up, asset stripped. So you have the squeezing of the capitalist sector, of what Adam Smith would consider to be the capitalist sector. You know, the squeezing of it completely until all you have is central banks on the one hand, financial markets, and the platforms.
So let me turn around and say it like this. Would you believe that competition is a good thing in an economy?
Absolutely. I wrote a book about it.
Okay, let me ask 4 questions. Do you believe that prices are useful?
Yes, I've read my Hayek.
Okay.
I understand.
Do you believe that profits are a good thing as an incentive and that you should reinvest profit back into ventures?
No. But I do believe
we
that...
have an
no,
argument.
hang on.
Great.
Gillian, wait. Because, when you read this, you'll see. There is a chapter in there called Markets Without Capitalism. Right? So in it, I try to answer your question by... in this book, I try to create a blueprint of how we could have done things differently.
This is the book.
So in my utopia, in this utopia, in the other now that I call it, markets are essential because Iris, the anthropologist, modeled after you, right? As you know, she says that at some point that the only thing that stops authoritarianism and the Soviet kind of gulag from descending upon us is markets and competition and freedom of enterprise. But the problem is that the moment you have share markets that are being effectively turbocharged through central bank money, and you have the financialization that you experience, and you explain very nicely in the book, then the competition dies.
So your basic argument is with equity markets and the current form of equity markets and stock holding companies, if I understand it rightly. I mean, let me say this. If you believe that competition is valuable, if you believe that prices matter, if you believe in a diversification of different roles and specialist functions, and that's good.
I believe in all that.
Okay. Well, that doesn't make you sound very socialist, with all due respect.
Well, that is not true. Do you remember Oscar Lange?
Sorry?
Oscar Lange.
Right.
Do you remember Oscar Lange?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You may need to remind us.
1920s. One of Friedrich von Hayek's great adversaries. The other was John Maynard Keynes. Oscar Lange was a socialist, communist actually, who believed in not a central, he was completely against the idea of Gosplan, of a central plan, but he was in favor of what effectively I have tried to map out in this book. A market where, let me give you an example, right? Imagine a world where you join a corporation and you get one share, in the same way that you enroll in university and you get a library card. And that library card, that one share, gives you one vote. It allows you to do stuff, borrow books, participate in decision making and so on. And then when you have to leave, you take your capital out and you have to hand over your library card, your one share. Now, just for a moment, go along with this. Imagine you have a market where you have competition between companies that are owned by those who happen to work in them. And you ask me whether I believe in profits. No, I don't, because if you have that system, you have net revenues. Because there is no distinction between profits and wages. Everybody profit shares.
I'm only going to chip in and ask, you did say you believed in competition.
Absolutely.
Diversity. So I wanted then what you're going to do with your profits. So Gillian asked you that. Then you said, and she said that's not socialist. And you said, well, actually it is. But then I got a bit confused. Sorry, this is a bit it's an alternative
define your
level
confusion
economics
so that
course.
I know.
But what would you do with the profits?
Oh, you reinvest them. Or you divide them. So
hand them out.
Let me give you an example. And this is a really existing example. I won't mention the company, but I've worked for that company back in 2011, 2012. It's in Washington State, United States. So imagine...
Look it up.
Look it up. Imagine a company where the revenue, total revenue, is divided in 4 parts. One part is fixed costs, rents, and servers and stuff. The second part is R&D. The third part is the basic income of everybody working from the janitor all the way to the arch designer. And the fourth part is bonuses. And imagine that the R&D segment is decided as a result of a vote where the employees vote between different business plans that are presented once a year, once every 2 years. The basic pay the same, and then bonuses are decided on the basis of the Eurovision Song Contest scoring system, where every employee gets 100 points, but you can only distribute them, award them to other people depending on your understanding, your appreciation of their estimation.
See, the problem is with your...
That sounds actually quite good, except Britain would always lose.
So, this is a different corporate structure, right? The company wants to maximize its revenues. There is competition, but there's no capitalism.
It doesn't
and there's no distinction between wages and profits.
Okay, the idea that workers get skin in the game, yes, absolutely. The idea they have some checks and balances and some involvement, absolutely. The idea you're going to organize 50, 500 people into a committee to take strategic business decisions and take votes. Have you ever tried organizing 10 people into taking swift decisions?
Well, I'm Greek, so I can't organize myself. I have 5 opinions.
Therein lies my point.
5 opinions.
I think you have a slightly higher vision of what humans will do to left their own devices.
No, but it doesn't have to be a committee. It doesn't have to be a committee. Firstly, look, in the company...
in practical terms, can you name one cooperative that has actually swelled in size and become a really effective operation?
Okay, let me tell you that the company I'm referring to had 350 employees and $1.2 billion of revenue a year. And it worked really very well with completely flat management.
So why aren't there more companies copying that?
Because they're being gobbled up. This is why. Because, think of the trustee savings bank. Remember what happened to it? It was gobbled up. So the idea of cooperatives that work is well established from the 19th century in this country. You had cooperative banks, cooperative supermarkets and so on that work magnificently, but in an environment, in an economic environment where, the large fish eats the smaller fish, especially, the smaller energetic fish. It's happening in Silicon Valley all the time.
But the issue is
the Google and so on, they're destroying competition by buying them up. So, that company in particular, right, you have no idea, I mean, I'm sure you do, the extent to which there were all these attempts by big money to buy it out. And it will go.
But that's a separate issue. That's a separate issue because you're basically arguing 2 things. On the one hand, you have the question of what's the best way to organize a bunch of people who want to be in business and get money to fund that? Should they sit around as a happy cooperative and sing Kumbaya? And
it doesn't have to be happy. It's not going to be happy, and you know that.
Unhappy cooperative.
Low blow.
But that's one question, i.e., how do they get money to finance what they're doing? And the second question then is there a regulatory structure to create a level playing field that stops the winners from essentially taking all and buying up the others? They're 2 separate questions.
This is great.
And I would agree on the second point that absolutely we need better umpires to create regulatory structures that stop winners taking all and doing unfair competition. It comes back to my 4 points about Adam Smith. On the question of how to organize companies, yes, cooperatives can sometimes work. Yes, I happen to think that with digital technology, probably it's getting easier to organize that than before. And digital transparency is changing things radically. Indeed. And I think in many ways may be the savior of capitalism. And I can talk about that if you want. However, I happen to think that in most cases, the ability to raise outside money from people who have a stake in a company, which is called an equity market, is a pretty efficient way of doing it unless, and I would agree with you, unless you have central banks printing oodles of cash, which essentially is distorting prices right now. I don't like what the central banks have done in recent years at all.
Yeah, but you know what, Gillian? It can't be otherwise. We are in this situation where now, if central banks stop printing money, The whole thing collapses.
So you're saying you don't like capitalism 2021 version, but there could be other sorts that you do.
What I'm saying is that you are being completely utopic in your...
I'm being utopic?
Absolutely.
You're being utopic?
Well, let's be utopic in a realistic way, shall we?
And I'm wondering why it wasn't utopian.
I think the idea, for instance, the idea that
By the way, I think utopic sounds much trendier than utopia. It sounds like it's so 20.
Sounds like a nasty
I think that
condition.
my utopia is more realistic than yours. The idea of going back to a capitalism that works is absolutely impossible now. And you talked about the importance of having umpires, of having proper regulation. It's impossible. They will always be captured because the concentration of power now under this what I call techno-feudalism is always going to be so gigantic that there is no government on this planet, however well-meaning its functionaries, that can do it. This is why I'm saying that if you really want competition and freedom and liberalism to be given a chance, we need to move away from share markets. We need to go to a system where you ask the question, where does the capital come in from? From savings. We need to do that which Adam Smith recognized, because Adam Smith was exactly on my side here. He was totally against public limited companies, because he understood that the moment you have liquid ownership, you have the ownership split up in tiny little pieces that can be traded anonymously in the stock exchange, suddenly his prerequisites for a well-functioning competitive market are gone.
So why not just have pension funds, automatic enrollment, to have people owning asset, mutual funds and things like that, providing some of the fuel for investing in companies, and then combine that with radical digital transparency so that people can actually track what companies are doing and actually express an idea, a vote if they want to.
Because
the
pension funds are taken over. The pension funds will always be taken over by those who happen to have a greater percentage of ownership than others. They will all, I mean, look at the three big, State Street, Vanguard, and so on. They control 90% of the New York Stock Exchange. So who controls them?
So why not work on reforming the pension funds and getting better financial oversight and regulation, and working with a system that appears to actually in many ways spark innovation and growth? It can be done better, but why not work with that rather than aspire for something which has never actually materialized anywhere in the world on any scale effectively?
But Gillian, capitalism never materialized anywhere in the world until it did.
Huh? Save it for the Q&A. You're going to be first. It's always good to know there's someone in the audience who's...
And in any case, I'm arguing that capitalism is already evolving out of itself.
I want to move us on because I think we're in danger, perhaps, on the markets and models. I just want to put a bit of a squeeze on Gillian on one point that I've heard, and this is the problem of the big tech monopolies and what that means. I mean, just to remind ourselves, the unprecedented levels of growth and consolidation.
So what are you going to do about Facebook?
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying is, corporate law which says one employee, one share, that kills off the power of Facebook. What is your proposal?
I was going to say that. Hang on, I was going to be even more awkward. Oi, Yanis, behave. Right. Gosh, it's thrown out. It's thrown. You are behaving beautifully. Just in your way. No, what I was thinking about what you said about the regulator, which was an interesting thought. But look, there's an example, Gillian, where how many people, eminent people in America and elsewhere, run around in circles saying we need better regulation of the tech companies. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't give a... Anyway, it just doesn't happen. To this point, I think Yanis is right to be pushing on this.
Yeah, sure.
It would appear to be an area which is immune to the sort of reformist, regulatory
Okay, let me give my answer to Facebook, what I do about Facebook, and it's different from what you expect. There's one thing that Adam Smith got totally wrong, in fact, several things, but here's the most important thing for today. He thought that barter was an old-fashioned, prehistoric practice that really just involved cavemen sitting around in caves swapping piles of berries for meat. And he presumed that barter would essentially die out once you invented money and credit. He was 100% wrong. Economists automatically assume that barter is old-fashioned and doesn't matter. Anthropologists, and I don't know if there are any anthropologists here tonight.
This is your moment.
Anthropologists know that barter is actually something which has often been around in many communities at the same time as money and credit. Anyone who's read David Graeber's wonderful book, Debt the First 5,000 Years, will know this. But
How
also,
is this going to help us with the tech?
I'm going to tell you, barter is alive and well today, big time, because Silicon Valley actually runs off barter. The wholesale swap of data for services. That is the bedrock of much of the tech sector today. It does not involve money, and we have no way of talking about it day to day except to say that it's free. And we tend to only focus on one aspect of this, which is how tech companies take our data. We don't look at the services. The reason I say this is important because actually we're missing a lot of things that are happening in the economy today, and also in terms of corporate valuations. We're also missing something that I would expect. If I was to go to all of you in the room today and say, would you like to pay for your services that you get from Google, Facebook, your email? Would you like to use money to buy all that? And in exchange, they can't take your data or they'll pay you for it. You might say, well, yes, for privacy reasons. But I guess that many of you would actually say, you know what? I don't want the hassle of having to use money to pay for it. I like getting free services. So the reason I mention all this is really important. If you want to reform tech today and create a more ethical tech system, you don't necessarily need to abolish barter. You need to change the terms of trade of barter. And that means essentially giving consumers more power in that barter trade, which involves, one, more transparency about how data is being used, more transparency about what the companies are doing inside the company with your data, and most crucially, and this comes back to the power of market forces, data portability. If we had the ability to pull our data out of any tech company and go somewhere else, we'd actually have the beginnings of a proper market for our service, for us as customers. If you put the onus on tech companies to guarantee data portability, then you'd get the beginnings of a proper market. And I'll say two more things quickly. Yeah. I think that competition would be more effective in giving consumers power and actually saying, you know what, I hate what Facebook has done, so I'm going to pull my data away and go somewhere else, than it would actually be in terms of regulation. And there is a model for it already, and it's called finance. If you change your bank account today, the onus is on the bank to ensure that your money goes from one bank to another. It's not on you. You don't have to go and sort of basically physically, get your pile of cash out and put it to another bank. That company is required to move your money. That is what we should have for tech companies today, along with better oversight, along with looking at breaking up platform control and monopolies in terms of vertical platforms. But actually, that is why consumer power and competition matters.
Convinced?
Yes and no. Let me start with a no.
Okay, I take that as a B+.
Well, that's what you get with when you have an economist. On the one hand, on the other hand, you remember what Truman said? I want a one-handed economist. I'm convinced that we need to change property rights over data, over personal data. So here we are on, and actually in my topic, Other Now, you'll find that there is a system called...
Okay, and if you haven't seen it, I'm going to show that I like Yanis.
Don't buy it, just... there is, I describe various systems. One is, how banking would work in my socialist market system, and also how data should work. And I have a system where I came up with the label "a penny for your thoughts." So, tiny micropayments that are automatically made by people so that they can also own their own data. So we are on the same page on this. But what you're suggesting is not doing anything about the power of Facebook, anything about the power of Amazon, because let's face it, the reason why people are in Facebook is because everybody else is in Facebook. So it's economies of scale and economies of scope, and there is nothing you can do about that by changing the system.
Yanis, do you have kids? One more thing. Teenagers aren't on Facebook. Do you have kids? Teenagers wouldn't be seen dead on Facebook. Fashions change surprisingly fast.
Okay, whatever. I mean, the
thought,
people who are
because
on
I need to
TikTok,
just
they
bring up
will
something
be
else.
on TikTok because the people they follow are on TikTok. So these are the network economies, which you understand very well. And when it comes to Amazon, there is this technological structure that supports a whole economy that is non-market and based on power. And there's nothing you can do about that if you stick to the idea of liquid property that is owned and traded in share markets.
I want to bring us to something else, and of course feel free to come back to this, so we just need to sort of move through a couple more cycles of themes perhaps before we get to questions. It would be very remiss, I think, on the road to COP26 not to talk about poor old planet Earth and the impact of capitalism on planet Earth, and whether you think, Gillian, that green growth is possible. I know you're a big... If you can be a big cheese, can you be a big cheese in ESG, a big environmentally friendly produced cheese in this area, suggests that you do believe in green growth. But there are many reasons, are there not, if we look around the planet today and man-made global warming, to say that capitalism has played a very negative role in that and to be rather sceptical.
Yep, I'd come back to the fourth part of the Adam Smith framework I laid out about the need to have a shared ethical, moral, legal vision. And above all else, a theme that I go on about in my book, which is the need to move from tunnel vision to lateral vision. Most of the tools that we developed in the late 20th century to make sense of the world, like economic models, apologies, Yanis, because I know you're an economist, but these lovely economic models, these lovely corporate balance sheets, these lovely big data sets are all very bounded and marked by tunnel vision.
You don't have to apologize because I agree with you.
Well, I was trying to needle you. But they basically treat everything that isn't inside the economic model or the balance sheet as an externality or a footprint, something outside that model. And what I would argue is that one of the things that went very badly wrong with a lot of the corporate vision and the economic models was treating the environment as an externality. They ignored who was going to pay for the damage that was created or the cost of the natural resources they were using.
That's quite a big flaw in the capitalist argument, then.
Well, if you can actually start measuring that and putting that into your models, you start to get a very different vision of how companies are valued, how they're looking at the world. There are ways of doing that, and people are developing that. Impact-weighted accounting.
Impact-weighted accounting.
ESG
I'm wondering
accounting.
if this is going to thrill Yanis, impact-weighted accounting.
Well, for that you need the regulation that you are never going to be able to have as long as power is so heavily concentrated. Look, let me give you an example, because we didn't manage to meet Anne this summer because half of Greece
you just turned me down.
No, because half of Greece burned down and I was going
That's
from...
right.
By the way, you know...
That exactly is what happened, actually, in fairness, just to not to be... we weren't going
and
to...
you missed an important part of my CV in these days. You know, I lead a political party in Greece. You presented me as if I'm an author and professor.
I did.
That's a previous life.
So he actually has power.
Find your registered voters.
I have no power.
And you're
I have
very
the
free
power
to
to speak.
You aspire to have power.
Yeah, but the reason why I mentioned the fires is because, look, speaking of green growth, okay, I also believe that in green growth, but I also believe in green degrowth. There are things that need to grow and things that need to degrow. Like we need less cement, less CO2, less of all the toxic derivatives, the toxic fumes, right? We need fewer of those things, fewer cars, whether they're electric or not, more public transport. But going back to the forest fires in Greece this summer, Greece is a failed state, right? But nevertheless, when it comes to profit making, it's very fast. So the day after, we were devastated and the flames died down. Large corporations came and took over the attempt to prevent those forests from becoming mud baths with the first rains. So you think, oh, that's a good thing. They came to help shore up the soil and all that. First thing they did was to offer contracts to the local population that effectively signed all their rights away for 20 euros a day. Okay, forget that. That's, you could expect that. The second thing they did was they are trying to win new contracts for replanting the forests using genetically modified trees that will grow very quickly, and they will give them the opportunity to, in the context of the green transition, harvest biomass for the purposes of green energy. If we allow them to do this, you're going to have, under the cover of green growth, you're going to have the devastation of the flora and the fauna of the land, and the conversion of these areas in Evia and so on into fiefdoms of Monsanto Bayer, who will have genetically poisoned the land while making it very green. Now, is this the green growth that we want? This is the green growth that this market-based system, not because it's a market, but because Monsanto is not a market.
Okay,
they are a toxic monolith.
Let me come back to this point again. As I said, you are on your home pitch. There are numerous examples of greenwashing. There's numerous examples of companies and financiers using the green label to do all kinds of egregious things. That I would completely agree with. However, one of the other reasons I believe in competition is that I believe in checks and balances. And I don't think we can sit there and trust government alone to turn us green. Back in the 1970s, when Milton Friedman developed his vision of shareholder capitalism, which I do not agree with, there were two things that were very different. One, back then, people thought that they could outsource the really difficult decisions in life, the social stuff, to governments, and companies just worried about their balance sheets. And secondly, you did not have radical transparency, and most people did not know what was actually happening inside companies. Today, we have a world where no one actually trusts the government to get stuff done, and we have a world where all of you have cell phones with extraordinary levels of access to information if you choose, and many aspects of corporate life are subject to radical transparency. The reason that you know so quickly about what was happening in those forests is precisely because of this radical transparency. So I come back to the point. It's not an either-or. We don't need government or companies to be green, or NGOs. We actually benefit by having different groups in society doing this. It is a good thing that actually we're not just relying on the Greek government alone to deal with replanting those forests. It's good that we have citizens armed with cell phones giving you the data you just quoted, and it's good that we've had companies coming in and feeling the need to do something about it, even if they are being essentially driven by less than virtuous principles, and even if some of the things they're doing are wrong. Many of the things that companies are doing today are better than they were doing 2 or 3 decades ago. So my question to you, Yanis, is this. Would you wind back the clock and have companies to go back to where they were 20 or 30 years ago? Would you only rely on government, the governments we have, to turn us green? Because look back what's happened in the last decade. It ain't been so good. One of the reasons why governments are under pressure to come to COP26 and do something is partly because there is a shift in zeitgeist amongst investors and businesses that reflects social shifts that comes back to radical transparency.
Come back on that, because we then must open up to our very patient audience.
You're quite clearly mistaking me for one of those socialists that likes the state. I loathe the state, in the same way that I loathe Monsanto and Bayer, right? So my worry, Gillian, is that the state and those large corporations are in cahoots. They're working together. And, I want diversity. I want people who live in these areas to be empowered to do things without either Bayer or Monsanto, descending upon them and effectively taking them over, or the state saying, oh, I will fix everything for you. The question is, how do you empower communities with the necessary capital, the necessary expertise, and leave them to their own devices in order to do stuff? I think that is the future. The future is for living neither under the thumb of the state nor under the thumb of corporate capital. Those companies that go in there are not going there to do anything good because of transparency. By the way, the transparency is an illusion. Because, I'm telling you now what most of those people know, in those areas of the forests, but I can tell you that not one television station, not one radio station, not one newspaper has ever reported on what is really happening on the ground because they are owned by the same corporate interests.
Newsflash, not everyone gets their news anymore from newspapers, much as I'd love them to do it.
I'm afraid they do.
Not even
not newspapers, but they do get it from even from the internet sites that have the capacity to dominate the internet.
Absolutely right. You reminded me that you lead a party, a newish party in Greece now called
Mera 25, which means
men of 25.
Mera. It's
what about women of 25?
Mera, not Mera.
Oh, Mera.
Yeah, don't worry,
it's from Carpe Diem, because we have the Diem 25 movement in Europe, and in Greek it's Mera 25.
I'm going to ask you just very briefly, and I do want to go to questions. We started a bit late, but we can only, people here have got very busy social lives. We'll have to let them go at some point. What about the wider world? You know, what about developing nations, China at the top scale of kind of importance in terms of its economic outputs, India and everything that flows from that? It can be a bit comfortable perhaps for Western progressives to sit in gatherings like this, saying what they think should happen on green growth. Do you think you could persuade people in countries who feel that they've come later to the fruits of capitalism? Perhaps in China, yes, you can call it state capitalism, but it feels quite capitalist when you're in it, that they need to replace their economic model.
I have no doubt that a large majority of people in India, in Bangladesh, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in China itself, do not want to play catch-up with the West in the sense of more cement, more environmental destruction, more destruction of their communities, more blocks of flats, destroying their villages. I'm sure that they would like to be empowered. The difficulty that we have with people in India and Bangladesh is the same difficulty we have here in the United Kingdom, in Greece, in France, and Germany. And it is because you mentioned David Graeber. The difficulty is to move away from Thatcher's dogma of Tina, that there is no alternative, to what David was saying, that everything could be different.
Great. Fantastic. What a great point at which to go to questions. You can ask all the things we didn't get to. This is the bit that gets like Strictly Come Dancing for me, because we've got an audience here. We've got an audience at home, and as one of our producers pointed out tonight, WhatsApp isn't working because Mark Zuckerberg was having an off day. So this bit's going to be really good fun. Please bear with me. So if you're in the audience, you'd like to ask a question, well, it's the good old-fashioned way, and we are in a chapel. You queue up to the microphone stands, which are at either side of the hall. Can someone sort of just give a wave to where they are, if you could? Right, thank you. What they said. Either side. So you actually do have to come to the microphone. We're not passing microphones around at the moment for obvious reasons. If you are watching online, you can ask questions by putting them into the chat tab on the right-hand side of your screen.
What's this, men?
Q&A button under the video.
Hang on
a minute. Hang on, you're gonna miss the really good bit. The exciting bit is you can ask a question by clicking on the Q&A button under the video screen and press send. Yeah, we're obviously doing this for people who've never used a computer before. Press send, people, and somehow it's going to show up with me. Who knows how? Because I don't like the sound of this very much, I'm going to start with people in the hall, but if you are at home, of course, you are very much part of this live event, so we will find a way to turn to your questions too. And I'm also supposed to tell you to tweet as well, hashtag IQ2. So now I've done it. Please tweet, because otherwise they keep reminding me and it's just terrible. Right, who is it? Oh, we have people with a microphone. Well, go for it. If you're first in the queue and you have a microphone. Sorry, do we start on this side? Oh, there only one microphone now. Great.
Yeah, sure. So
please go ahead.
My question is sort of a spin on one of the prompt of this discussion, which is just to ask, is capitalism even possible, or has it even been possible as a system of economic organization? Because it seems as though the brief history of capitalism has been guided by technological advancement, which in turn caused inequality, which itself was a source necessary to finance that growth of capital. And my question is just, when you look at the rise of wealth inequality and the gap between creditors and debtors that emerges from that, and then when you look at economic recessions and the necessary need for bailouts.
Try to just come to the question,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind. I think I got the inequality. No, I don't mean to be rude. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
It's just this kind of,
But
everyone's just pleased to be out. We've got a lot of questions.
In short, it seems as though you need government consistently in order to sustain capitalism. That's all.
To that thought, panel, I'm going to take a question from the other side as well.
Hi. My question is just focusing on information, because I think we said, you know, back in the day there was no asymmetry of information, and today we have all the information that we need to make informed decisions and for markets to run efficiently. I would argue that actually do you not think that to fix capitalism we need less asymmetry of information in the market? I think that today there's more information, but it's not the right information. And without the right information, how are you supposed to fix these issues?
Well, you answer first, Yanis, and we'll flip over to Gillian. Just try to unite the two questions, or take the one that most speaks to your views or fully formed prejudices.
My reaction to your question is, you reminded me of this great illusion that is motivated. That, you know, capitalism is a system where wealth is produced individually, and then the state comes and socializes it, when it's exactly the opposite. And the state has always been part of the evolution of capitalism. Regarding information, yes, I mean, information is power. And exorbitant power goes hand in hand with the exorbitant asymmetry in information. But it's, you know, this power is not simply based on information. If I have a gun and you don't have a gun, you know, I have power over you. If you're starving, if your kids are going to bed hungry at night, and the only way of getting, you know, some milk or bread is, you know, to do whatever I ask you to do, then that's not a question of the asymmetry of information. Asymmetry of information then comes on top of it, and it gives me even more of an extravagant, exorbitant privilege over you.
I would argue that if information is power, then some elements of the power structures are changing today, because in the past information really was held very tightly by vertical hierarchies and trickled down, or at least as they wanted. Today, information is available to many, many people, and they may not have the ability to frame it and pass it. It's still concentrated. I wouldn't pretend we have a completely democratic information system at all, but there's more information out there today than there ever was in the past. And that has really interesting implications. I mean, whether it's the leak of the papers that we've just seen, the last Pandora papers in the last 48 hours, suddenly casting a spotlight in a way that would have been unimaginable 30, 40 years ago. Whether it's things like #MeToo, where suddenly women who had been fragmented, powerless, isolated, managed to use an information sharing platform to coalesce and actually topple some people. And I wouldn't pretend for a millisecond that that shift in power is complete or perfect whatsoever, but it's striking compared to the past. And back to your point about capitalism, has it been tried perfectly? Do we have examples? Absolutely not. But I go back to that Winston Churchill point. It's the worst system to organize an economy, except for the others that have been tried.
Right, let's roll on. We'll keep questions and answers flowing pretty rapidly if we could, just to get a lot of variety. Yes, madam. Hello.
Hi there. My question is for Ms. Tett and those 4 factors from the theory of moral sentiments that you mentioned. My question is, in this competitive system driven by profit, where money is basically where wealth is basically what you are valued by, isn't it inevitable that the winners of the system will co-opt the political system that is supposed to and therefore unequal access is inevitable?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would argue that's one reason why you need checks and balances.
Okay, we're going to take another question from here. We're perfectly balanced tonight. Impartiality, but I just think it's just a good way of getting a load of questions in. So another gentleman on my left.
I think, like, capitalism and short-termism are like identical twins. And essentially, you have them hand in hand to have instant gratification through technology and also instantaneous markets. But we live in a world where you have long-term problems for climate change, and you need global coordination, not competition. How is capitalism going to be compatible with that?
Great questions, both great questions. Yanis, quick response if you could.
Adam Smith's idea was that through the market, conflict of interest turns into collaboration and coordination. But he himself knew the limits of this. For instance, when it came to education, he thought that this doesn't work. The problem, however, is, and this is an answer to both questions, that, you know, if you look at the theory of moral sentiments, which Gillian did very well to bring up, you know, Smith quite rightly explains that the baker, the butcher, and the brewer, in order to provide the common good for the common good, even though that's not their intention, the intention is to make a living for themselves, they need to have you know, a bed of shared morals and shared values on which to operate. The problem is that with the second industrial revolution, and now especially with the digital revolution, you have economies of scale and economies of scope that destroy both the moral bed on which the baker, the brewer, and the butcher can operate, as well as their businesses. They are taken over by Starbucks or whatever. And then suddenly, both the theory of the of moral sentiments and the wealth of nations goes out of the window. And we have what I think can be described quite feasibly and reasonably as techno-feudalism.
That's why we need anti-monopoly laws. That's why we need regulation. That's why we need government. It's not an either-or. You know, if you're going to play a good game of soccer, you need to have an umpire. You need to have agreed rules. You need to have someone organize a league. But you still need to have the players compete.
And that's why I'm calling you utopic. Because it is impossible to have those rules in these governments when you have two parties, both representing the techno-feudal lords in parliament in every country.
Well, I would argue that actually doing without the competition, doing without the product motive, doing without the pricing, because pricing, I still think, is an amazingly good mechanism for crystallizing probability and competition. Without all that, that's even more utopic.
I agree. That's why we need to do away with capitalism, to have proper competition and proper markets.
So you're arguing that socialism done properly would include better markets and better competition.
Yes.
That is not a vision of socialism I've often seen defined.
Well, I'm not your run-of-the-mill socialist. What can I do?
I think we call that socialism 3.0.
Those of you who've watched Federer Nadal know where that rally was going, right? Let's get a couple more questions, and I've got a couple from our audience at home. Sorry to speed us up a little bit, but we'll have to do that just to get the nice range of voices I'd love to hear. Yes, sir. And some, any women who would like to join the queue, please do, because men always do. Women, not so much. Right.
We're up here.
Oh my goodness! Hello. Is that what they did with you? Listen, if you have a question, I'll come to you next. Not that I can actually see anything, but, you know, it's great to know you're there. Sorry, but I should take this gentleman because I said I would.
A question for Yanis. You described it as an unprecedented situation, the monopolies of the digital platforms, that capitalism can't recover from that. But arguably, the context of Standard Oil, the Rockefellers with railways, and the fledgling sort of US capitalist states in the 1890s was much more impactful in those days. And through regulation, capitalism was fixed. Gillian describes data transparency and governance and regulation. Why can't that fix the current situation with digital platforms?
I have a supporter somewhere in the hall. Great.
Was there a question from upstairs, which might be a little difficult, but I couldn't resist that call from the gods.
Hi, it's me.
Hello. Go ahead.
I was just wondering what you all thought about like emerging socialist societies like the Zapatistas in Mexico or stuff to that nature. Could you hear me?
Could you just that last about merging socialist societies? Was that the question?
The emerging socialist.
Emerging social. I've got it. Sorry. Okay. I think we can make sense. What do you think of emerging socialist societies?
Yeah.
Like, do you want an example? Like, like the Zapatistas in Mexico, for example.
Hey, hold your thoughts. So thank you. Well done, by the way, for getting in touch. And there's another gentleman here.
Thank you so much. So, I mean, all three of us, I
You might
think...
need to come to the
All right, sorry.
They're
All right, so both speakers today, and I think I also agree, like, we noticed that there is this remarkable emergence and proliferation of these super companies that co-opt governments. But I was wondering why, Yanis, you think that this is a terminal point of capitalism rather than a cyclical feature of the system when large companies existed and were eventually gobbled up by governments, the most notable example being the East India Company, and why cooperatives are going to replace them when cooperatives by their very nature have no incentives to reinvest. and expand their operations.
Great. Quick points on each.
Well, I will combine the Standard Oil question with this question about the East India Company. The East India Company is a very interesting example because you see, if capitalism was left at that, it would never have succeeded. The reason why capitalism succeeded was because it went beyond what the East India Company did with production, not just simply exploitation, expropriation, and trade and arbitrage. But the Standard Oil question is fascinating. Look, Rockefeller and Standard Oil was extremely powerful, and Theodore Roosevelt did amazingly well to break it up, and the antitrust legislation is to be applauded. Can we do the same? No, I don't think so. I don't think we can do the same with Amazon and with Facebook, and let me tell you why. Standard Oil was a monopoly. There was a market, they managed to corner the market. Every petrol station in almost every state was owned by them. But it was a market, right? Compare Standard Oil and contrast it with Amazon. Imagine a science fiction horror movie where, or scenario, where you step out into Islington and suddenly you realize as you're walking down the street that every building belongs to the same person. Everything that is being bought or sold is controlled by one person, or the algorithm owned by one person. That the park bench on which you sit is controlled by that same person. But moreover, not only the air that you breathe, but what you can see and what you can't see is controlled by the same person. This is worse than Orwell. That's Amazon. That is not a monopoly. That the only thing I can imagine coming close to that is the fiefdom, Downton Abbey. The Lord owns the whole thing. Only this time it's a techno-fiefdom, and the power that bestows upon the people who own it, and the people who own the people who own the people who own all the other companies that are fading within the capitalist realm, is such that I do not believe it is possible to do that which Roosevelt did with Standard Oil.
Try to go back to the questions if you could, Gillian.
Yeah.
Just anything that hasn't
I just wanted to
picked
go
up.
back to the issue about Zapatista, which I think was a very interesting point to make. And I should say, by the way, that as part of my belief in the power of competition, I also believe in pluralism in different models, different types of companies. I should say that I happen to believe that societies and economies are best served when you have a divergence of ownership structures and ownership models. I don't think that having public equity markets, listed companies is the only way to run companies. I think you should have checks and balances. And going back to the issue about whether there are other ways to organize societies, I say bring on the experiments and let's see what works.
Selba Mahmood had the same, just trying to take a couple of thoughts and questions that have come in by carrier pigeon from those at home, and welcome, thank you for staying with us. Selma asks, is there a version of capitalism that wouldn't require constant growth of profit? I guess you would say no to that.
I think there's a version of capitalism where you could certainly introduce regulations that wouldn't introduce growth at all costs and ignoring the externalities and the footprint of companies. But the imperative to have growth, competition, is a great driver of innovation.
Okay, let's go to the lady over here. Hello.
Can capitalism exist without exploitation? Because frankly, one of the arguments against capitalism is how exploitative it is for people. That it exists in a way that rich people are able to stay so like really affluent, and there are people that exist that are just like exceedingly poor. So is there a world that exploitation cannot happen at all?
Great question. I think Bertolt Brecht wrote about 25 plays about it, so that's a really big and deep
Can I jump in there and say...
Well, can you? I'm not sure you can. I think I'm going to take the other gentleman first.
We have one more question.
No, not because I'm going to say, I'd be right down that. I think it's a great question. I'm just very conscious. We could stay on a little bit,
We have
if
one
that's
more
okay.
question up
Let's
here.
do this gentleman.
My question's for Julian, so I hope you jump in onto this one. You spoke about how there is sort of radical transformation of technology and we have more information at our fingertips so we can decide better. But there was little discussion about the agency that people have. So 3/4 of the world, or at least 40% of the world is living below the poverty line. So they don't really have the agency of choosing whether or not to interact with Google or whoever. So in that situation, can capitalism be counted upon that now choose to interact with a company or not choose to interact based on where I'm placed?
So rather interrelated questions, as it turned out. Gillian first, and
the answer is that I would argue no, you can't rely just on capitalism alone to fix that. Definitely not. That's why you need government and regulation. However, having better information is a good place to start, and a good place to start getting people focused on trying to campaign for change and focusing on it. Because the key point is this: can capitalism exist without exploitation? Not if you believe that any competition produces winners or losers. And if you think that competition spurs people to compete harder, to fight harder, and to innovate and help growth, then that's inevitable. But what you can do is introduce checks and balances to actually rein in the egregious levels of exploitation and competition and prevent the winners from abusing the losers, and prevent that being recycled over generations. Absolutely. I would also turn it around and ask Yanis and say this. My experience of looking at systems which claim to be socialist or run on socialist principles, is that they often have embedded insidious forms of exploitation, of inequality, but less acknowledged as well. I've yet to see a truly egalitarian socialist system.
Well, look, where we will agree is that we cannot have a society which is free and worth living in and fighting for if it's not based on markets and competition. Here we can agree. Where we disagree is on private ownership of things that are necessary in order to produce other things, capital. This is where disagreement is. Now, Gillian may very well say that, and she would be right, that a market which operates without private ownership of means of production has never been tried before. It's true. What I'm saying is it is time to go for it. Because the alternative, which is regulating the beasts of this capitalist system, which I call techno-feudalism, by the way, for me, it's a question of which is, going back to the, to a previous altercation, which is more utopic? To think that you can regulate this beast, which is running out of control and is seriously anti-liberal, anti-democratic. It's turning against the basic principles of liberalism. Remember, Friedrich von Hayek, the great guru of the libertarians, even of Thatcher, once said that, socialists are not bad people, he said about us. The problem is that in order to enact socialism, they have to do things that contradict their principles. I reverse that, and I'm saying that those who are advocating in favor of capitalism, you're not bad people. You want good things, and things that we share. But in order to do it, you will have to violate your own liberal principles.
Let's take 2 more questions. I'm afraid that may be what we have time for in the hall.
We have one more up here. Hello. Up here as
is
well.
that another? Is that the voice from up?
Yes. Hello.
All right. Okay. I'll take pity. 3. They'll shoot me after. You know what's going to happen, don't you? The lady here, then up there, and the gentleman. I'm afraid we will have to compress them into one glorious round of just a minute. Off you go.
Thank you. So my question is directed to Yanis. So one of the main points with which you seem to differ with capitalism was on profits. So you've mentioned as another alternative for the government making money, just basically printing money, which of course is not a sustainable solution in the long term. So without companies being profit-driven in a competitive environment, what incentive do companies really have to then fund those governments?
Right, hold that thought. Hello.
Hello, thank you. So my question is about power in both the utopic visions that you've presented, and there's something about what you said that assumes that inequalities will be eradicated once capitalism is either fixed or completely taken over by something new. But that doesn't account for what Cedric Robinson has written about racial capitalism and actually racial inequality and the Black Lives Matter movement, which is very anti-capitalist. So in your utopic models, how do you account?
Very good that you brought that up, actually. That would have been a big miss if we hadn't had it. I know, sorry, it's going to be extremely squeezed just the way our time is run, but both have a thought on that, and I'll take the gentleman here as well, just to...
just wanted to get your views on how much of the issue with capitalism might be the over-financialization of it, because we have a situation where global capital markets are now worth more than cumulative global GDP. And where does this stop? Does this break at some point, or will QE...
Yanis, you dealt with that a bit earlier, didn't you? Yep. Okay. Right. Please range freely, but I would like to hear certainly. I would like to very much answer the second question because we didn't talk about it as much as we should.
Sure. So who's going to have the last word?
Oh, just get on with it.
Do you want me to have a go so you can have
Me.
the last word? You can have it. Look.
I don't know. It depends when the pub closes, but go.
No, I will go first. So Gillian can have the last word.
Oh, I see. Well, great. Okay, go on.
So very briefly, I hate doing this, but I'll do it. I explain this in the book. Seriously.
And just in case you haven't seen it yet.
I'm not saying that I'm explaining it in a convincing way, but my answer to your question is there. How can you have a fully functioning market-based system which is technologically advanced, free, liberal, democratic, without capitalism? It's in there. I'm not going to try to emulate it. But let me say something about power, racism, and I will add patriarchy. I don't believe that we have the answers to these things. This is a novel, and in it I try to make it absolutely clear that I do not believe that my side of politics, even my very quaint version of socialism, even if we manage to sort out all the problems with corporations, with the power of capital to exploit, to reproduce itself and so on, that we can deal with patriarchy or racism. Discrimination runs very deeply in our societies. And, we can reduce the toxicity which always breeds more racism and more xenophobia and more sexism, but I'm pessimistic about human nature. We really need, I look into myself and I find a Nazi living in me, a racist living in me, a sexist living in me. I constantly have battles with myself, and anybody who tells me that you're not like that, you're lying. We are all like this. We all have a dark side, and we all need to fight constantly against it.
That's an interesting answer. Gillian.
I would say that one of the messages that anthropology tries to hammer home is that by immersing yourself in the lives of others who seem strange to you, you don't just get empathy for another point of view and a vision of how you could do things differently, you also get the ability to look back at yourself with more clarity and understand yourself. Because a fish can't see water unless they jump out of their fishbowl. And I think that's what we need to do today, because we assume that the vision of capitalism that we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years is the only vision of capitalism out there that could possibly exist. And that's simply not true. The profit principle, the competition principle, the idea of trade has been expressed in many different ways. Markets have been expressed in many different ways too. Yanis now appears to be defining markets as something that you can have in socialism. Great, bring it on, incorporate it back into a broader church of capitalism under that idea. But my key point is this, that actually it is possible to reimagine capitalism. It is possible to fix its flaws. It is not a perfect system. But capitalism and markets operate on the idea that you need to have a plurality of ideas and competition. You need to have checks and balances. Things move in cycles. And right now, we need to fix capitalism. And I would argue we actually could, with a combination of digital technology, the fact you have more people empowered, the fact we're being forced to widen our lens beyond balance sheets to look at things like the environment, and the very fact that we're having this debate tonight, where actually Yanis and I have probably ended up agreeing on more than we've been disagreeing on.
The last question came in, so I'm going to actually squidge one in, not looking at the organisers in case they tell me to get off. But Lawrence Anton had a great last question, and this one, fortunately, you can answer in very few words. She said, please, because otherwise we'll get kicked out. Who will be the biggest players in determining whether we do fix capitalism, if it can be fixed? Thank you, Lawrence. Great question. Very last thought. Yanis, then Gillian, and then we'll take another vote.
It can't be fixed because it has evolved out of itself.
So no big players because it doesn't matter.
Capitalism is not a problem anymore.
I thought you were going to say
we have another problem. Capitalism, in the same way, that, if I'm right? In the same way that, if we were having this discussion in 1800, how can we fix feudalism? The answer is, it's not relevant. Capitalism is already taking over. Let's talk about capitalism. I would say in the 1800s. Similarly today, I'm saying capitalism is no longer relevant, it's dead. Everything else is utopic that we're discussing about how we can fix capitalism
So the
by
big
means of
players don't
social
matter.
democracy, by means of, regulation and so on. It's a different beast we're facing, and we're all going to be victims of it. It's a highly illiberal beast.
Let's get Gillian's final word and then the vote. Who are the big players in this, fixing capitalism?
Who is going to address it or fix it? Well, inevitably the next generation.
Short and sweet. Absolutely. Great. Let's retake our vote. Let's see if anyone's changed their mind since the beginning of our energetic debate. Who thinks capitalism, albeit with tweaks and reforms and twiddles and regulation and whatever, is still the best economic system we've got? I don't know. I don't think that's as many as when we started, but I'm an entirely unfair judge. And who thinks we need a completely new economic system? Still yes. Well, I don't know, panel. What do you think? Who can give a view on how? I think that was fairly. I think we lost. Do you think it would be fair? Who else is looking into the audience? Hannah, did you have a look? It's very hard to judge from up here.
These are boys' games. We should not be playing these boys' games. Who won and who lost?
Well, you see, Yanis doesn't believe in competition, and I do. So by default, I win.
Speaking as the patriarchy, I think that perhaps some votes went from that original proposition. I'm not sure where they landed because they seemed to come out, and it probably is down to the brilliance of us because it seemed to come out about 50-50 at the end. So there you are. Thank you so much to Yanis Varoufakis, to Gillian Tett for a great conversation. They will both, as promised or threatened, be signing books at the back of the venue. So if you'd like a copy, do stick around, and I'm sure they'll have a word with you as well. They came in from Athens and New York, and I came from Amwell Street. It's been great. Thank you all so much where you came from. Thank you.